a lot of people know this as the Milky Way galaxy, and you can see where the sun is actually showing you exactly where you are right here in one of these, in the suburbs of the Milky Way, right? A nice quiet area, just far away from the galactic equator for us to have a nice, quiet area of space where there's not a lot of catastrophe going on consistently. Stars are moving at a very decent speed around the galactic equator, whereas if you were closer in, your star would move much faster, which would age you much faster, right? But what's interesting is, how did we get here? Scientists know that we're not from here. Now, I'm going to read this science article to you, just a couple of sentences for it. It says, imagine the shock of growing up in a loving family with people who call you mom and dad, and then suddenly learning that you were actually adopted. This happens in real life. How can this be? Using volumes of data from the 2-micron all-sky survey in 2-mass infrared mode, a major project to survey the sky in infrared light led the University of Massachusetts, and the astronomers are now answering this huge question that have baffled scientists for decades, proving that our own Milky Way galaxy is consuming one of its neighbors in a dramatic display of ongoing galactic cannibalism. The study, published in the Astrophysical Journal, is the first step to map the full extent of the Sagittarius galaxy and show it visually in vivid detail and how its debris wraps around and passes through our Milky Way. Sagittarius is 10,000 times smaller in mass, and so it's getting stretched out, torn apart, and gobbled up by the bigger Milky Way. So if you ever go night watching out in the night sky in a nice area with no light pollution, and you look up at the sky and you see that giant band of stars whipping across, and you go, man, it's the Milky Way. Guess what? You've been wrong the whole time. It's not the Milky Way. Now, this is all the science books have already been rewritten. They've already been rewritten. It's the Sagittarius Dwarf galaxy. Why is this important? Because right where the Sagittarius Dwarf, not the Sagittarius constellation, the Sagittarius Dwarf galaxy, right where it actually merges and meets, there's a little tiny dot. I don't know if you can see it, a little tiny yellow dot where it meets and is being swallowed up by the Milky Way. That's where we are. We also now know, by doing a reverse calculation of the trajectory of this Sagittarius merger, that this solar system that we're in, didn't come from the Milky Way. We are actually aliens here. We don't even belong in this galaxy. So do aliens exist? They're all sitting right here. We're the aliens. So the Sagittarius Dwarf is another galaxy that's being consumed gravitationally and merging in with the Milky Way. And exactly at the point where it meets is where we are. Now, what's interesting about that, in the astrophysical books, you discover that in the early creation of this solar system, there were all kind of rogue planets and rogue suns flowing through here, wreaking havoc and creating disasters and everything else. Guess what the Enuma Elish says? The same exact thing. Again, ancient tablets, thousands of years old. Modern science tells you the same exact story. It's the same exact story. So we had a planet named Tiamat back then. Tiamat was this massive planet, 4 to 6 times larger than the Earth, a water-bearing planet with land, and in my opinion, most likely life. One of the biggest theories that I have when you talk about these miners that go into these deep shafts, and depending on how many layers down, you can tell how many millions of years back you're going in time. 3 million years, 4 million years, 500 million years, they found a vase. 200 million years, they found a hammer. They're finding all these tools and vases and all these incredible anomalies at hundreds of millions of years and back in time, depending on the depth of the anomaly, right, in the shaft. How can that be if human beings have only really been Homo sapien and creating tools for maybe 200,000 years? If you want to stretch it to maybe almost 1 million, okay, you can do that. But where did these anomalies come from? In my opinion, so Tiamat in the ancient texts, it was actually colliding with another moonlet of another planet that was orbiting a brown dwarf star. When it collided with Tiamat, it blew into giant pieces. That is what your asteroid belt comes from. The asteroid belt, you have Mercury, Venus, Earth, and then you have Mars, and then you have another planet, which nobody talks about, called Ceres, C-E-R-E-S. There's another planet. It has more fresh water on it than Earth, by the way. Then after Ceres, you have the asteroid belt, okay? The asteroid belt is an exploded planet. It was Tiamat in ancient times. The ancients said this. Now, this is interesting because Earth didn't exist yet at the time that Tiamat was here. They said that Tiamat was so beautiful that that the glow from the sun reflecting on it rivaled the sun's glory. How could they know that? How could they know that if the Earth wasn't here? What perspective did they see this planet from? What planet did they look at it from? We don't know. But what's interesting is that was a statement that was made in the text. And so Tiamat exploded. A giant chunk of it swung away with all the water. This is where the waters divided from the waters. It recoalesced back into what we now have called Ki, which is the Earth. We are part of another planet. That's why when you dig into this planet, millions of years in the past, layers down, you discover anomalies that shouldn't be there because, in my opinion, this is another Billy Carson hypothesis. Those anomalies were when we were part of another planet. Those are artifacts from Tiamat that we're uncovering. You never heard anybody talk about this before. That's my whole theory. So I'm working on a show about this right now. So you see you have the way that our solar system is set up, and you have the asteroid belt right there between Mars and Jupiter. Right after Mars, there's a little tiny planet called Ceres. Like I said, it's hardly on any star maps or anything. But that right there, that what you're looking at, what they call the hammered bracelet in the Bible and other texts, the ancients have known about it for eons. That is actually remnants of Tiamat, an exploded planet. And this right here is actually a NASA image from nasa.gov. It shows the path of a brown dwarf star. You can kind of see it in the lower corner, passing through our solar system. Okay, now this brown dwarf star, they've now actually found it. They've labeled it a planet to not call it a star. They call it Planet 9. It actually orbits in a very strange elliptical orbit. It orbits our sun now every 4,200 years as the orbit has changed over time. What's interesting, it has six little planets orbiting it. 6 little planets orbiting. It says it's another solar system in our solar system. So we don't live in a solar system with one sun. We live in a binary solar system. And so as scientists at NASA and other space agencies started to research the skies and they launched the WISE telescope, they started to find out and realize, wow, wait a minute. Trinary and binary stars are more common than solar systems with single stars. And where are all these weird anomalies coming from? They noticed that Neptune and Saturn switched places because something came through gravitationally huge and made it switch orbits. We know this because we can actually rewind the orbiting clock with a computer simulation and find out all the original orbits. So they know that happened. We know that something passed by so abrupt it caused Mercury to slow down its spin on its axis. One Mercury day is 60 Earth days. That's how slow it spins on its axis. And we're going to talk about Mercury today, if I can get to that slide. It's an important slide to get to, all right? This is where the astronomer came forward on this actual clip here. This is a screenshot of it. And he said, astronomers discovered dwarf planet 7.5 billion miles from the sun. Now, what they don't say on that little line there in the actual clip, the astronomer says that it's orbiting its own star, a brown dwarf star. What is a brown dwarf star? A brown dwarf is a failed star. It's a very small star, but it has the same mass as our yellow sun. So it's gravitationally, it's just as heavy, and it creates something called gravitational waves as the two suns tug on each other. Back about 12 years ago, I started digging deep into astronomy, and I got really heavy into it, started buying really nice telescopes, right? And I started scanning the skies, and I started studying the precession of the equinoxes for myself. And as I started studying the precession of the equinox, the movement of the stars or constellations across the sky, I noticed something interesting. Based on the calculations, the precession should have been about 27 years, but based on my 1 or 2 month calculation, if I projected it into the future, it was about 25,000 years. I did this over and over again. I said, wait a minute, what can cause precession to slow down? How is this possible? Like, how can precession actually slow down? And so I started looking into all kinds of theories from ancient texts and everything else, and I couldn't find anything. And then one day, I was looking at something about orbital mechanics, and I found that when stars are orbiting each other, they speed up and they slow down. They speed up and they slow down so they can create breakaway speed. And I was like, wow. So then I looked into gravitational assist with technology, how we used to launch satellites and send them to deep space, like the Voyager missions, and we would do the same thing. We would create this breakaway speed, and we would take off and create these angles in space so we can get our probes deep into space. And so I said, what if our sun is orbiting something that's creating this? And that's how I dug and found that we actually have a brown dwarf orbiting us, but it's not like it's mainstream news. But if you go into the science books, it's actually there. They hide everything in plain sight.